Most of us think about the workplace as a place of misery and suffering. And we may like our work, we may like the people we work with, but there's still this, heavy load that people carry. And what Martha and I wanted to do was to put together a book that really will help people completely change their experience of the workplace. And like you said, using conflict in particular are those moments when we get the most upset at work, when someone does something that upsets us, or we do something that upsets someone, and then that upsets us. These patterns in the workplace are happening all the time. And what we teach in Healing at Work is basically how to use all those moments when you are the most triggered to turn them into healing opportunities. And I'm happy to go into some of the research of about. So there's some amazing work that was done back in the late 90s by two doctors, Felipe and Anda. And they worked with the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. And they did a survey of about 17,000 people in the US. And what they did is they asked these 17,000 people to review a set of questions. And they said, we just want you to tell us which of these adverse experiences did you experience before the age of 18? And what they, so for example, the list of the adverse experiences are now called the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences include really traumatic things like physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. It's neglect. It is, for example, having an addict or somebody with addiction in the home. Anyway, there are 10 really serious things, right? And the researchers never expected the results that they got, which indicated that nearly 2/3 of the people they surveyed had experienced at least one of those ACEs. And, actually, I get chills when I think about this because it was such a revolutionary moment when Martha and I were reviewing this research to realize that nearly, 2/3 experience at least one of these ACEs. Well, there's a lot of us, including myself and Martha, who experienced 4 or more of the ACEs. And, I'm a person who never thought my childhood was that bad. I always assumed other people had far worse childhoods. But when I sat down and did the survey myself, I was kind of shocked. Like, wow, I had no idea. And what happens is when we grow up in a childhood that's dysfunctional, let's just call it that. I think many of us can identify with that. And even if you didn't grow up in a childhood, if you're one of the, people not in that 2/3, but they're the 1/3 who actually had a really nice childhood, most of us walk away from our childhood, especially those of us from dysfunctional childhoods, with beliefs about ourselves that get shaped in that environment, beliefs about other people, particularly typically our parents, our authority figures, and we are always trying to find ways to navigate our environment so that we can create a sense of safety and predictability. And so, for example, I'll use myself, and I'm really curious to hear what you think about this because I'm curious about this for you. Is in my childhood, um, I know my parents did the best they could. That's the other thing I wanted to say is that this is not about judging the parents. They did the best they could with their own set of issues from their own past. And so my dad he had many, many gifts, but he also had a nature where he was unpredictably raging over very small things. And as a small girl, my dad was really big. He was very heavy. Um, if something happened that literally triggered him, he would fly into a very scary rage. I remember feeling like this bull was charging me, and I've always felt cornered and frightened. And my way of coping with that unpredictability was to be as perfect and people pleasing as possible, and in hoping that I could help him. I always felt like it was my fault that I deserved to get into trouble. That was one of my limiting beliefs that I took away from my childhood. And I also believed coming out of that childhood that I um, I had to look to everybody else to determine my worth. I never realized that was my job to do that. And so I spent a lot of years in my corporate career, for the majority of my career, always in a place of trying to anticipate what the other person needs. If I thought somebody was mad at me, I'd get triggered. If I felt like I wasn't doing enough, which was every day, I'd go home and beat myself up. So we take on these different beliefs and patterns of our behavior. And I'm really curious, Ben, for you with your own background. I don't know much about your own childhood or anything that happened when you were little, but do you have, when you think back about your childhood, were there, was it, was it a childhood where you took some beliefs away about yourself that were limiting beliefs that you came to adapt as the truth?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We just recently did a team retreat for one of my companies, and we had brought in a company that deals with a lot of different performance things, but a lot of it around heart coherence. And one of the people on my team is my older sister, and it was really interesting as we were diving into it. She has like a different view point. And just it's not different. It's a more aware view of like what she was experiencing. Um, and when I think back, when it came to being in the family, I think there's a lot of like achievement around, especially like academics. And I remember following behind, like, my sister's footsteps, which she was like, school was designed for her. She's very much of like, hey, you give me something she loves, organize it, put it into a structure, and then be able to go execute it. So, school, like, hello. I mean, that's pretty much they give you a syllabus, you get a planner, and they give you a project that you need to get done. And I remember growing up just feeling probably be behind in that, maybe that I wasn't like a quote unquote good student. But I remember kind of breaking through some of some of that in like seventh grade. I distinctly remember just feeling kind of like, man, like kind of feeling bad about the grades I was getting. And then I just had this realization that these grades were a representation of how someone else viewed how smart I was, not how I actually can view how smart I am. And I think that, so that kind of kiboshed some of that. But the one that actually stuck with me was that, not anything with my family or like my sister, but more in the fact, I think the image I had was that like I'm just not a good student. Like I am not like I don't function well in being a student. And I experienced it in two ways. And the one in terms of where, when my son in 2023 was in the hospital in the NICU before he died. I was writing. I ended up just keeping everyone apprised what was going on during those 16 days. I would send out a message, but I'd write it out and I just started writing. And it was just a really great way for me to just a self process what I was going through, but also make sure helping people come along the ride with us so that they could know. And I got done. And I remember I had multiple people come up to me and they said, "You need to turn what you wrote into a book," which was funny to me, Susan, because I would have thought before that I was in my brain, I am not a good writer. Like I'm not a good writer. And to have people say that, it was like, man, that's been pretty self-limiting. And I think the second one that kind of played in that idea that I'm just not a good student, I'm not good in academia sort of piece was when I was studying for my private pilot's license and then my instrument rating. There's a lot of studying that has to happen, and I remember my wife, as we're going through it, some of these things bubbling up to the surface, me being like, ugh, like feeling a little bit stressed about, well, I'm just not going to do really well at this. I'm just like, oh, I'm just not a really good studier. I mean, these things would come out, and I think the people who know me would be like, well, that's not usually something that comes out of my mouth. That and and I ended up passing like beautifully, and it sort of burst some of these little bubbles. Well, actually surfaced these bubbles but kind of burst them as well because, I mean, they don't let people pass. Like you can't bullshit your way through like a private pilot license or instrument rating, like an oral check ride, right? You can't do that. Like they're going to go, you either know it or you don't, right? And so I think those are the things when I'm listening to your story, um, I find really interesting. But I think the thing that's fascinating more to me is the fact that 2/3, you're saying 2/3.
Right, 2/3. And they did this research outside the US as well, and it was very similar what they found. And, so what's interesting, I love your story about not feeling like you were a good student, how you carried that belief and how it shaped your thoughts about different things. If you think about that 2/3 percentage and you go into your workplace, it's very likely that 2/3 of the people you're working with or working for have experienced some of those significant traumas before the age of 18. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily be a trauma. I've had a lot of people come up to me after a keynote to say, I didn't experience any of those ACEs. And I still don't feel, I never felt like I measured up to my dad. I never felt like I could do anything right. I had one senior executive tell me once that his dad said to him every day, "You can't do anything right." And so you think about this, it's like I almost have this vision of a laboratory with these chemicals bubbling. You have all of us coming into the workplace, wanting to do a good job, wanting to have good relationships, and we have all this unconscious weight that we're carrying with us. Our limiting beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs about others, my belief about authority. I really thought authority held uh, the responsibility for determining whether or not I was going to be good enough. And then all of our patterns that we create to try to navigate through that. A lot of high achieving, very successful people that are working, entrepreneurs, academia, as well as corporate, are bringing these unconscious elements into their workplaces. And when they're experiencing another person, let's say they're in conflict with another person or someone does something that upsets them, we're typically completely unconscious to how much that's being fueled by things that we believed about ourselves, things we learned about ourselves, patterns we adapted from the past. And if you run into a personality at work and you have a strong emotional reaction to them, maybe it's somebody that you see as being too judgmental of you, or that you feel like you can never please that person. Maybe it's a boss, maybe not. If you think about it, all that energy from the past, all those, the neural pathways in our brain, very well created around these unconscious beliefs and patterns. When we come into conflict with somebody and we get upset, generally that person is actually completely innocent. We typically recruit them into our story about how bad and awful they are, when in fact, our reaction to them may be accentuated, um, like gasoline on that fire, because we're having a response to some old things that happened that are stored inside of our bodies. And, so I'll give you a perfect example. I actually did a TEDx talk on this. It's called Tackling Perfectionism at Work. It's only 9 minutes, but it highlights this point perfectly. So my dad, who was scary and, overwhelming, um, I remember going into one of my very early jobs after graduate school. And I was working for a woman, and I had been there about a year, I think. And she called me in her office one day and she said, basically, your team has won the President's Award of Excellence for a major project. And I thought, oh, yay. And then she said in her second breath, but you're not getting the award. And I was like, what? I was the leader I was a project leader. I don't understand. And she basically just waved me off and didn't answer me. And it was very unsettling. And I was completely unclear about why I wasn't going to get the award. It was a cash award, by the way. So I left her office. And the next day, I did something that I would never do today, knowing how the corporate politics work. But I went to her boss and I asked him, do you know why I'm not getting the award? He didn't even know my team had won the award. And he had no idea why this particular boss had decided not to give it to me. But he said he would find out. Well, the next thing I know, I get called back into this woman's office. And by the way, I think it's important to note that she had a little statue on her desk. And on one side of the statue was Glenda the Good Witch. And on the other side was seriously, on the other side of which was the Wicked Witch of the West, and she would turn the statue every day based on her mood. I am not kidding you. And so if she was in a good mood, you'd see Glenda looking at you. If she was in a bad mood, you'd see the Wicked Witch of the West looking at you. And when she called me back in her office, the Wicked Witch was like teetering on the edge of the desk right in front of me. And I mean, she went into a full on rage, right? You know, she was so mad. How dare you go to the boss? Who do you think you are? And all I remember in that moment was I was frozen with fear, like I was with my dad. I mean, I was frozen in fear. I sat at a hardwood, it was a chair, and I can remember the hot tears just streaming down my face. And I tell you what I was thinking in that moment was, I deserve this. I did something wrong. This is my fault. Because that's what I felt like. Those were the beliefs I took away about myself in my relationship with my dad. Rather than saying, oh my God, what the hell's wrong with this woman? I mean, she was out of control. It was totally inappropriate. Um, I ended up resigning about maybe 4 or 5 months later because I felt humiliated and embarrassed. And I had no idea how much that unpredictable environment with my dad was like gasoline on the fire of a woman who was judging me, blaming me. And, so my reaction was extremely high. And what happens is when we're in this unconscious state, I call it the unconscious wounded career path, is we keep going into work every day. We run into these people. I call it, Martha and I call it a bumper car moment when you crash into someone. It's like an emotional crash, um, where you think everything's going along fine. All of a sudden, that someone slams you in the back, and you're like, "What the heck was that?" And what typically would happen, not just with me, but with lots of leaders I've coached over the years, is that we would go into a spiral into a pit of painful emotion, suffering. For me, it was stress, worry, anxiety, fear that got unleashed in these moments when I felt like I'd done something wrong. And I had such a strong reaction to that extremely angry, very masculine woman who I thought she was right and I was wrong. And so what happens at work, and you can think about this in your own workplace and with people you've worked in the past. I know I was listening to one of your earlier podcasts this week, and I know there was one particular person, I think it was a partner of yours, who was very difficult. And there was a crash that had happened. I know that he'd done something that was disrespectful towards your sister. And as a result, you had a strong reaction and you changed some things related to your involvement with that company. And that was a bumper car crash that you were having with that particular individual. And it made you angry and it was unfair. And it's very likely there was a personality, possibly in the past of your life, who had similar characteristics. And so, and it could have been just the protective nature that you had towards your sister because she's so important to you. But what happens is when you have that response, that emotional response, that triggered response, we go completely out of our prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning part of our brain, and right into our nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And so, mine was pleasing, which is the fawn. Yours might have been, I don't know for sure because I don't know all the details, but it could have been flight. You left that situation, I think. So fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. You see this playing out at work every day. The fighters are the bullies in the workplace. That's the strategy that they learned when they were upset about something. You see people freezing, or another way to think about it is trying to stay off the radar, not speaking up, agreeing with everybody. They're staying safe by freezing, literally. I remember one amazing woman I worked with in one of my early companies who told me one day, she worked in my department. She said, Susan, I've been here 30 years. I have never spoken first until spoken to. Talk about hiding and staying on the radar. Yeah. And she was doing some personal work and that she was changing that. But so there's fight, flight, flight are the people that leave, they quit the company because they blame the other person for their misery. And you see this playing out every single day. It's like it's like Groundhog Day. We're crashing into each other. Our unconscious pasts are coming with us. We're bringing our adult professional selves and our childhood reality with us. And it's no wonder there's a lot of combustion happening. And unfortunately, the downside of all of this is the experience of the painful suffering. And I I would beat myself up every day, and I hear this from other people as well. And I didn't know how to regulate my nervous system. I know, we never learned that. I'm almost 63. We never learned that when I was growing up. So my way of regulating my nervous system was to drink. That's the only thing I knew that would take the edge off of it. And what I know from the research is that a lot of very successful people are using unhealthy self-soothing habits as a way of regulating their nervous system. And it could be you don't even need to name the list. Mine was alcoholism. I'm very grateful to be sober for 22 years now. Um, but I could have easily have died, literally. I mean, I was driving too fast. There are so many moments that I think, thank you God for um, the 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 way that He has supported me and kept me safe. But my mission is to change that experience of the unconscious wounded career path, where we typically, when we're upset, we go into blaming the other person, judging them. They're the bad guy or bad woman. And unfortunately, when we do that, we're stuck in that story that's very similar to a story that happened when we were little. When we're stuck there, we are a victim. We are what Sue Page calls either victim, villain, or martyr. Yeah. The opportunity. I was a victim and a martyr for so many years, both at work as well as in my marriage. And unfortunately, um, when we are blaming the other person, judging the other person, it doesn't take away how poorly we feel about ourselves. And so that's for me, this is the real opportunity of the workplace and why Martha and I wrote the book called Healing at Work. It's because of all these bumper car crashes that happen every single day. We have all these opportunities to stop ourselves and say, okay, this is really interesting. I'm having a really strong reaction. I'm really upset by what this person just did. What is it saying about me? And where do I have unresolved emotional patterns and needs that were never met that I am trying to get met through this person? And so it's basically recognizing that when you are triggered, upset, activated, whatever word you want to use, that is the moment of clarity to say, okay, this person's holding up a mirror to me. There's an unresolved pattern that I'm trying to have this person solve for me, but it's not their job, it's my job. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. What I love about this, I'm gonna call it framework, is that it allows you to look at the world differently rather than seeing actions as you see energy. It's really two energy. It's really two energies. It's basically uh your past energy and someone else's past energy. And I like in your framework that it moves it towards agency, right? There's agency. And the thing that I love also is as I'm listening to you talk about this woman who has the, Glenda or the Wicked Witch of the West, right? Is that it almost can move you to a place of empathy.
True. If you can get past the emotion that you're experiencing, if you can say, okay, this person's giving me an opportunity to break through the unresolved need that I had with my dad to have him accept me. And it wasn't her job to do that. That's my job, right? But boy, scared the hell out of me, and I left not too long after that.
So I love all of this, and I want to get into like the modalities. Of, hey, how do we actually once we recognize what do we go through? But one of the things that keeps popping in my brain, right, is that, and it's probably the internal bumper car fairness or whatever in me. But how do you function? Which is why, in terms of, I don't really work really well in a corporate environment versus more an entrepreneurial with intrapreneurs is how do you have agency in a way that and then get other people to be able to in the workplace, right? So, I mean, is it the subtle thing is to be able to go, oh, hey, I just got done reading this really interesting book called Healing at Work. Uh, do you want to do it? So, how do you get, because it's awesome if you have it, right? But my guess is even if you have become an expert internal bumper car driver, how do you avoid other people's bumper car Like, because I'm guessing no matter what, it's still when you're at work and you're like, oh man, okay, well that unnecessary, that kind of hurt, not because of any past reaction, but because the fact is that was just like, I don't want to have to deal with that bullshit.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I'm just sitting here thinking about all these different people. So, well, I love your point about, relationships are energy, and there's an energetic force field that's happening between us. And I think there's a couple of things that you brought up here. I'm going to try to make sure I can articulate them clearly. The first thing, the piece about agency. Let's say somebody has done something, um, and they're angry at you, and you feel like you're having a strong reaction to their anger towards you, and you're blaming that person. What I recommend is that we have to realize that when somebody else is upset, that's their property. Melody Beatty, the Language of Letting Go book that she has, I think it's from May 13th reading. She talks about property lines and being real clear on what's your property and what's the other person's property. So, for example, my property is my interpretations, my actions, my decisions, my consequences. I mean, she articulates this beautifully. And then recognizing in that moment when somebody else is mad at you and behaving in a certain way that you don't want to deal with, is to realize that they have their own property. They have their own, frame of reference around what's happening to them at that particular moment and why they might be taking something out on you. And so the first thing is just getting really clear to say, is this my property or their property? I was talking to somebody the other day who got angry. They seemed to get angry, and I had a reaction because I'm very sensitive to angry people, particularly strong, angry men. That's a real trigger for me. And I remember thinking in the moment was like, huh, I'm really curious about his reaction because actually I did nothing that could have caused his behavior. And so I got really clear with myself rather than going into the emotional, it's like an emotional vacuum in those moments. Instead of going there, I stopped myself and I got really curious about myself, saying, okay, what's going on? Okay, this is not my property. And so I don't own any of this. And therefore, I don't need to have a reaction. And immediately I stepped back into my agency. I hadn't calm because while this person was upset about something, in afterwards we talked about it. He says, I wasn't angry with you. And I laughed. I said, well, it certainly felt that way at first, but there's an opportunity, again, that conscious state to say, okay, do I own his behavior or her behavior or not? And if not, I'm going to release it and recognize that I own my property. I think that's one really clear place to go. The second one, which we already talked a little bit about, but I find it extremely powerful, is this framework from this amazing program called Pathways to Successful Living. Sue Page, the founder, with her husband, where she talks about you get to decide in every moment if you're going to be a victim, villain, martyr, or leader. And the idea of all of us are leaders. I don't care if you lead people or not. We're all leading ourselves. We are all the CEO of me. And therefore, if you're going to do victim, villain, martyr, then um, you're taking on a lot of reactive responses rather than saying, what do I need to do here as a leader? And so I think that's another helpful way to step into your agency when someone's getting triggered around you. Now, if you get really triggered by their behavior, again, that's a bumper car crash. And if you are having a strong emotional reaction, you're getting upset, you're ruminating about it all night long or for the next week, then you do have some work to do to release that triggered state. And there are some practical ways to do that.
Yeah. It's really interesting when you're talking about this idea of, victim, would you say victim, martyr?
Yeah, victim, villain, martyr, leader.
Yeah. I'm wondering in terms of, well, I think of these things as like you said, the CEO of me, and I was thinking about these things as margins, right? So if we think about businesses, if you're running a business, and all of those other identities seem like low margin businesses. So like you would never run a business that way because you're like these are bullshit margins. Like probably not going to deal with it. Um, I want to. I think the thing that I'm finding interesting, you use the word leader but I've heard you now say multiple times when you've talked about like, oh, I'm having a moment, or there actually, I'm not having a moment. There is a moment being created for me that is it, but you said, I'm curious. And so I'm wondering from the standpoint, what would you say is the difference between a leader versus an explorer? Because when I'm listening to you, I'm almost hearing you rather like the leader. It's almost like a explorative leader, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm recognizing this. Okay, stop the train, and then you put on like your explorer hat and be like, well, that I'm really curious. That's really curious. I mean, I've heard you say a couple times now. Talk to me a little bit about that, and what does that mean when you have these moments that are being created?
Well, I think the moments that are being created when we get into a tangle with somebody else are the opportunities for the healing. Because, if we're coming from a calm um, state, our nervous system is completely regulated, we're clear, we know what we need to do to move forward. That's where we always want to be. Too many of us spend too much time worrying about what happened, ruminating about what happened, beating ourselves up about what happened, moving away, running away from might have what happened. And so the piece for me, the curiosity, and first to answer your question about the explorer versus the leader, I think it's the same thing. I really do. And I think that it's the same thing because the opportunity is to become conscious, whatever role you play in life. If you're an entry level employee, becoming conscious about your reactions to other people, becoming curious, becoming aware, becoming tuned into what your body is doing in relationship to certain people that may upset you. And so I see leader and explorer as basically the same. I mean, we're all human beings exploring the journey of our life and wanting to create a life that is as free of friction as possible so that we're not spending all of our time in misery and being upset, which I think also makes us sick. And so the opportunity is those moments that we've been talking about, those moments of clarity, like, I am really mad at this person. I have some work to do. I have to do some healing work. Um, in fact, talking about the energy too, I think this is really powerful. I worked with an amazing coach years ago named Tony Chinoy. And I remember one night I was really mad at my boss. And the reason was we were going into a meeting the next day with the board of directors. And I really wanted to look good because I was, fairly new to this company. And we had some important conversations that we needed to take to the board. And the CEO was trying to make a decision about some elements of executive compensation. And he had to go to a trip to DC. Um, and literally the night before the board meeting, I had no idea, are we going to make the change to this comp program or are we going to keep it the same? I had no idea. So I was really stressed. I was really triggered. I don't know what to do. I was really image management. I was really worried about my image with the board because I was pretty new to this company. And I called my coach. I was very upset. I was very fearful about what they would think about me. And she said something. She said, and this again goes back to the energy piece we were talking about. She said, you have a lot of judgment toward your boss right now. And I said, I do. Look bad. I wasn't blaming him for making me look a bit, but I was worried about looking bad. So I had a lot of judgment, anger. I was angry, right? Why couldn't we get this sorted out before he had to travel? And she said, basically, if you're feeling judgment, he'll feel that because of the energetic exchange that you have. She said, I want you to switch from judgment to compassion. And what can you do in this moment to be compassionate towards your boss rather than judgmental? And I thought, well, I have nothing to lose because I was so, upset about what it was unfolding. Of course, my boss had no idea. He's an innocent, I like recruited him into my story. He had no idea I'd been recruited into my story. And so I thought, well, I have nothing to lose. So I wrote him a note that night. And all I said was, dear boss, um, I want you to know that I know you're traveling. You must be exhausted. And I know we never made a final decision about which direction we're going to go. So we've created two different decks. and I hope you get some rest tonight. I tried to be compassionate. And the next day, we get into the meeting, and he picked one of the decks before we went into the meeting. And like halfway through the meeting, he starts going on about, you know, she's great. I really like working with Susan. He starts saying this to the board. And I remember thinking, the compassion thing really worked. Because it was so easy to get into a state of anger and reaction and fear and worry about what might happen. But as soon as we did that shift, and I coach my own clients on this because it was such a powerful moment for me, is realizing that we carry a lot of judgment about other people. In many cases, it's because we judge ourselves the worst. But if we can actually start to become more compassionate in those moments when we're the most upset, when we can become compassionate with ourselves, and there are different ways to do that, all the like energetic charge dissipates and you're able to move forward. And so that I don't know if that's helpful or not, but when I think about your original question about the explorer versus the leader, ultimately, whatever role you're in, and if you're human, you are experiencing people in different ways. And there are different ways to turn the situation around. That's that the dog biting the man, in this case, the man biting the dog, where we don't have to keep blaming the other people, but it's that mirror, the opportunity to say, oh, okay, what do I need to do here? And fortunately, I had a great coach who helped me.
Yeah, I love the thing that keeps coming into my head, and you said like compassion, is when I've had the best outcomes, when there's been conflict, it's been the um s- especially like in my professional side. It's usually I run through uh a checklist of before I'm like, oh, hey, before we're gonna go like all dragon fire breathing, is it something could I have done something like is there anything I could have done differently that would have put this in a better position to win? Was it a system structure? Was it a messaging structure? Was it a training or skill like structure that I would have at agency of? Inevitably, is then when I run through that checklist, there's usually about like two or three things where I'm like, you know what, I could have done this. And by the time I actually get to the bottom of that, the reality of it is that agency is that like I didn't own something, and if I didn't own it, how could I expect anyone else to like own it to that level? Because I didn't put them in a position to win. And inevitably, when I get to the end of that, Susan, is that I actually usually, for the most part, in a place of like gratitude. You're going, you know, if we didn't have this moment, we would not have uncovered something that we could do like and be better about. And I think about all these moments. I had I actually just I just had a podcast with him yesterday, but a gentleman named Daniel White, who's done some like spiritual work with, and we were talking about, and I want to move into where I think that I'm curious from your assessment, where is the best place to practice this, but we were talking about marriage. And specifically, so for those who don't know, like I am married to my business partner, and so we live together, we work together. And as you can probably imagine, there are lots of opportunities for what I like to call marital conversations. And I remember him saying something. He goes, hey, when you are triggered, he goes, I want you to transition this to be able to go to be able to say thank you to her. And I was like, hold on. I remember feeling, and predominantly because what he's saying, what you have uncovered in this, like all of this research, is that we're just navigating these past traumas, and that when you're presented with something that you have a reaction, it's really a gift being given to you, like on an actual plate. And you don't have to go search for it. You don't have to pay hundreds of dollars for like, you know, therapy. It's literally going, oh, and I'm curious, do you find that the best front line in practicing this healing at work is in marriages?
Well, I'm not a marriage expert, so I'm a workplace expert, which is where I focus. All of these practices work in our life, right?
children, siblings, parents, marriage. I'm just going like this book is literally the foundation, I feel like, of like all relationships.
Well, I agree with that. The book's about the workplace, but I do agree. I mean, there's some amazing work by a man named Dr. Terry Real. He's got wonderful frameworks for helping couples. He works with couples. And one of his frameworks that I love, that I actually learned from Celine, who introduced us, is this idea that there are sort of three different versions of ourselves. There's our wounded child. That's the little one that was frightened. It's all the raw emotion, fear of rejection, is abandonment, whatever. There's that part of us that exists in us. There is what he calls the adaptive child, the adapted or adaptive child, which is he describes as the ego defense protector. That it's sort of the teenager version of us that's wanting to protect that little one from being hurt. And then there's the highest functioning adult self. I think he calls it the wise adult. I like highest functioning adult self. What I've noticed, and this is true both, in work as well as in our relationships outside of work, is that a lot of times we are showing up in that adapted child. Like my ego defense personality is the people pleaser, the perfectionist. It's all that, and that part of me could get really angry if someone's not appreciating how perfection is being delivered, etc. But what Dr. Real does is he works with couples and helping them, particularly whoever is sort of the most in state of one of those, in either the wounded child or the adapted child. He'll work with that patient in the relationship as a couple to help them realize how much that unconscious past from their childhood is playing out in the relationship. And I also like the framing too from a workplace standpoint, because we want to come in as our highest functioning adult selves. However, most of us, me included, come in our adapted child, and we're always in this. I can't remember who it was that said, basically teenagers in suits at work, unaware. I wish I could cite who said that. It's not. That's not my original idea, but that's what I experienced at work. So the home life, our relationships, our marriages, I can look back now and I can tell you exactly what role I played in the end of my marriage to my husband, who is also the father of my kids. And I was martyr, victim, villain, regularly. I was always blaming him. I was never taking accountability for my own work, which is what we're talking about here. And, it's interesting. I do believe everything plays out the way it needs to play out. But it was a painful journey for both of us. Now he had his own set of issues also, but in the marriage, we were both stuck in adapted child, I think, honestly, and never getting out of that triggered state and staying in victim, villain, and martyr. And it's like Groundhog Day. You just keep replaying that pattern over and over and over. So yeah, I think all these concepts resonate for sure with relationships. Like I said, my experiences working with not only my own issues along the path, but a lot of very talented, complex, fascinating, amazing people over those 36 years.
Yeah. But before we get into actually like, hey, once you've recognized this, how can we actually metabolize this? Can you walk through um, what are the outcomes? Because I think some people they go, okay, this is really great, really appreciate that, Susan. You're helping me like understand it. What happens when you become aware and you do these like frameworks that you're going to talk about? Like, what are the outcomes? Like, is it like we lose weight, we make more money? Like, what are the things like, what's I guess what I'm asking, what's in it for me in terms of to be able to go, okay, this is why I should be aware.
Well, what's in it for you? I've got a long list in my keynote, which I could show you real quickly. But basically, what's in it for us is that, first of all, we start to create more time in our calendars, because so often we are busy blaming another person, beating ourselves up, ruminating about what happened at work, and which can go on for weeks and weeks. That starts to change dramatically when we start to recognize these patterns we've been talking about. And so people become less tense, more calm, more expansive in terms of their time. Um, they are not spending so much time in those triggered states, the what I call the misery and suffering. Um, and it will also result in people becoming aware of maybe how much dependency they have on things to help them self-regulate. So in people really healthy ways to self-regulate, which we'll talk about in a few minutes related to the practices. When you learn how to do that, the emotional charge dissipates and people can come into place where they're actually in their highest functioning self, where they're in that prefrontal cortex where they can make good decisions. When our nervous systems are ambushed, we are not in a state of making good decisions. And so I think quality decision making is better, productivity is better, relationships in the workplace are better. It actually can address how silos can start to break down. A lot of times silos are created across teams because you've got two individuals who are triggered by each other, for lots of different reasons. So you also see that. Another really powerful outcome, and this is the reason why I wrote the book, because I can't go back in time, is we start to interact differently with ourselves and our relationships outside of work. So I used people pleasing perfectionism. So I always was in over proving mode. I was always worried about how I was performing or not performing. When I was at home, I was worried about work. And as a result of that, I neglected my own sons growing up. And they're both now, my youngest is 25, my oldest son will be 27. I can never go back to that time of quality with them when they were young. And being neglected, emotionally neglected, is one of the ACEs. And so they both have experienced at least one of those ACEs. And so our relationships change with ourselves and the people around us, higher quality relationships, more accountability, um, more less time focused on blaming the other person. There's so many positives that come from doing this work. And it's not only good for us individually and good for our families, it's also good for our organizations as well. Because if you think about organizations where people are in a highly triggered state, it can feel chaotic. It can affect culture. These issues we're talking about with healing at work, if you are a leader leading people and you are dysregulated and unaware of that, it can disrupt the entire ecosystem of your team. It can just, if you're like in the top of the company, it can significantly affect the entire culture of the organization. There's a concept I want to share from a company called Sen Delaney, um, and I love it. It's called the shadow of the leader. And basically, what they say is that whatever the leader is doing, and I'm talking about leader leading people right now, whatever that person's doing, everybody in that organization will want to shadow. They will be like the leader. And so, if you have a highly dysregulated leader over many people who is highly anxious, somewhat chaotic, you start to see that entire pattern playing out in that organization. And so, when people start to focus on healing at work and breaking through some of the issues we've been talking about, it can actually start to change how people are experiencing their teams and their leaders and the culture of the organization as well.
Wow. That is absolutely amazing. The but I know I keep saying before we get into these these I do have a question. Do you feel that in this world of AI, in where the value that you bring transitions from the transactions and the work that you do to the how and who you are being in the value that you're creating, do you think that like your book is actually when people can no longer hide behind the transactions and the skill that they're bringing to work, they are forced to what to me it seems like my thesis is that people are going to have to be more human, especially in corporations, and especially if corporations want to hang on to workers, where it's like, well, why should I stay here? Right? I mean, I think the thing that's going to happen is rather than workers being worried about being replaced by AI, I think corporations need to be worried about the fact is like, well, why would I stay here doing this when I can like everything in it, under the sun is telling me that AI, I can just go out and create something on my own, right? So I'm just curious, do you feel that that your book is actually a really forefront running book that people should be reading to actually succeed in this new world where we can't hide behind, well, I'm just really good at doing this task?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I do believe, I mean, we could have a whole discussion on AI, which I think is a remarkable invention. I really do. So I think, first of all, I think that, jobs will certainly change for sure. There's no question about that. And ultimately, I believe that jobs will change for the good of humans and that the things that are, what the Microsoft team, I was at a meeting with them years ago with a number of us. They talked about, well, of course, they use Copilot, but there are others as well. But they were talking about the purpose of it is really how do we eliminate drudgery from people's lives and enable them to have more fulfilling lives, whether it's work or home. And so I think ultimately healing at work is a universal guide for whether we are working with AI or not. Um, I think that AI gives us a lot of capability to focus on things, the bigger things, the things that really matter, the relationships, et cetera, that cannot be replaced by AI. And that it's an incredibly valuable capability. But whether we are working with AI or not, we're still going to be having bumper car crashes with humans, right? Like even in an AI relationship, the human still has to be the leader in that relationship. And if you're not showing up as a leader in that relationship, then you get junk, right? And so I am certainly not a technology expert, but I believe that you've got to continue to play the role to create the creative role, which you were talking about previously. And, that is a role that I believe is what we all are here on earth to do is to create. So I do think, regardless of whether you're in a situation where you're working with AI or not, you will be over time, very likely, because it's such an amazingly incredible capability to augment human capability, in my view. You're still going to have human beings that you're crashing into. you know? So I think it's relevant whether it is an organization that's completely transforming how it does its work and will continue to be very relevant. I think I really believe it's a universal relevant topic.
I love it. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm sure we could probably riff on that another hour, but let's get into the actually tactical, right? If it is inevitable, that my guess is you and I are both going to potentially run into another human being when we get done with this podcast. So let's talk about we run into people, it's inevitable. What do we do, right? When we have these, as you call these bumper car moments.
Yeah. So I have a very simple 3-step process, and so I'll explain it. Step number one: when you get triggered or emotionally upset about something happening at work, step number one I call create choice. And what that means is our natural system is to go into reaction, and we go into the fight, flight, freeze mode. When you do that, you lose your power. You are not in your problem solving mode. And so the way you create choice is recognizing that that triggered emotion is showing up in your body somewhere. For me, when I was triggered and upset at work, I always felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest. For other people, it could be their neck gets really tense. It could be their gut gets upset. It depends on every single person. So the first thing in creating choice is just notice, where are you feeling this in your body? That's the first thing. And then the other thing is, once you've acknowledged that your body is having a reaction to this triggered bumper car moment, that is the moment to use, the technique is sound, movement, and breath. In other words, you're going to move that energy out in your body. The body is so interesting. There's a wonderful book. I'm sure you've heard of it. The Body Keeps the Score. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but it's long, but it's really good. And so when we're in a state of emotional reaction, we have to create choice, or we're not gonna move forward. We're gonna stay stuck. And so the way to move that out of your body is through sound, movement, or breath. And I have some really simple techniques. Um, and I've had wonderful mentors who've taught me some of these techniques as well. One is I actually have sitting in my office a blue plastic baseball bat from Amazon for $5. And so one way to move that emotion out of my body is to take the baseball bat and to go into a quiet place where there's nobody else and whack it as hard as I can on a chair or a couch or whatever, or a bed, until I feel like that emotion is out of my body. So I might go in and I might yell and scream while I'm, hitting the baseball bat on a couch. Ah, just getting it out of my body. It could be like, you think about a zebra being chased by a lion. When the zebra gets away from the lion, it always shakes itself. There's like the animal shake to release the adrenaline. And in some respect, that's what this is. Um, Other ways, for me, sound, movement, and breath. Breath, I less focus on because I always say I'm not a good breather. But another technique is this comes again from Sue Page's work. It's called the silent scream. And I love this technique, and I'll show it to you. I know we're not being videoed for your podcast, but basically, what you do, I'm going to stand up. Can you see me okay? What you do is you imagine what it is that's upsetting you. You reach up and you grab it. Well, not really. You grab it, you pull it down with all your might, and you do a silent scream, and you shoot it out behind you. It's just getting the emotion out of your body. There are some other techniques. I won't go into all of them right now. It's maybe for another day, but it's recognizing that to release the it's really adrenaline, cortisol that's going on in your system. It's important before you can actually figure out what you need to do about it. You have to create choice by letting this out of your body. So that's this first step, is creating choice, is releasing it out of your body, sound, movement, and breath. The second step I call elevate action. And so rather than doing what you would normally do, you have to say to yourself, now that you're in your highest functioning, self and the executive cortex of your brain, the question is, what can I do next that will elevate my action? In other words, it's not going to be a triggered response, the victim, villain, martyr response. It's going to be an elevated, highest functioning response. And just taking the time to release it out of your body, creating the choice, it gives you the chance to create choice about how you're going to respond, and then move into elevate action. I'll use a personal example right now. And I had a friend of mine that she had said some things, and we were at a point where I thought, I don't think this relationship's going to continue. And I was really triggered by her. She was really triggered by me. And I remember doing some of this work to think, okay, I have to create choice. So I did the body, letting the things out, sound, movement, breath. One time I'm doing this exercise, I started doing somersaults. I mean, it was just weird. I started singing one time. I mean, just whatever happens, it doesn't matter. I'm using sound, movement, and breath. And when I was in the elevated state, elevate your action phase of this formula, I call it the rapid power reclaim. I had this clarity that what she was saying to me were not words that belonged to me. I felt like those are words that are really more directed to her. She had a very angry, violent mother when she was growing up. And as I listened to what she was saying in this regulated state, because I released this the adrenaline and cortisol by sound, movement, and breath, I got super clear on this really has nothing to do with me. And if the relationship ends, I'll be sad, but I'm okay. And it was like a big release by my elevated action. Was I am just going to release it, and I acknowledge that she's having an unconscious reaction right now, and I'm okay, and whatever happens is okay. And then we ended up, because I like, it was almost like I dropped the tug of war, the rope, dropped it, and we had another conversation, and we ended up becoming even closer. And so my elevated action was to not personalize what she was saying to me. And then I became compassionate because I could hear what she was really saying. I must have triggered her about something. It reminded her of her mother, so she had a strong reaction. But that elevated action led to an even deeper, more important relationship. So that's step two, that I elevated my action. I did get angry. I didn't scream and yell at her. I didn't do all the things I wanted to do. I got calm after my body was, calm. And then I basically said, I hope we can continue. And if not, I'm okay with that. And we continued. So then the final tangible step is celebrate and integrate. So when we do something different than what we normally do, it's important to celebrate it. And this is something I learned from Celine, because you're anchoring it into your identity. When you do something different by taking the act of celebrating, and I remember the totally different story. I gotten really upset about something at work. I was really triggered. I did the steps that you and I just talked about, the create choice and then to elevate my action. And I elevated my action. And so my celebrating, all I did was go outside. And I remember standing in nature and looking up at this beautiful blue sky, listening to the birds. I mean, I could still feel like it was yesterday, feeling the light breeze on my face and just feeling joyful that I had done something differently. And that's boom, that's an anchor into my identity. And so that's the practice. I mean, there's some more sophisticated methods that can be taught, but you can't respond out of fight, flight, freeze. So you have to create choice. You have to recognize it, release it, and then move on to elevate action. And it could be just to be a really thoughtful, what can I do that's different than what I would normally do? And then finally celebrate it. And that can be done lots of different ways. I've gone and had a massage before when I've celebrated something. I might just go outside and sit and have a cup of coffee on my porch with my dogs nearby. But it's those memories that come from the celebration that begin to shift the neural pathways in our brain. And that's the power of the research around neuroplasticity, the ability to change and evolve the brain. And I believe strongly through healing at work, people can learn how to change the limiting beliefs that we've carried in our hearts for so many years. We can change how we think about ourselves and others, as well as the patterns that we play out. And every time we celebrate something we've done differently, we're integrating it into our identity.
It's interesting as I'm listening to you, you talk about uh, fight, flight, fawn. It seems like what you're talking about, there is another state of being and it's freedom. Because like that is a state of being because it's not saying you can't have these actions. And I think that so often people hear, oh, well, I shouldn't be doing this, right? Which to me, anytime I hear the word should or shouldn't, it's like a leading indicator of judgment. But I so love your simple, like, and I think don't you call this something rapid reclaimer, right? Yeah, I love this idea of choice. And not only that, but you made it really simple. Hey, you know what? I can go sound, movement, or breath. One of those three. And
Combination, like I like sound and movement. Like I like jumping up and down, punching at something. I have a shaker machine that shakes you, which is supposedly good for digestion and osteoporosis. I don't know. I've been known to go down there and just get on that machine and turn it on high because my whole body is like shaking. And when I did this recently, I was really mad at a client because I felt like they just had ghosted me. And I was really mad, but I'm on the shaking machine and I'm doing this, the movement. And I realized I was actually punching at myself. And I started to realize I'm mad at myself. And it was such a moment of like, huh. It was as soon as I got with the body, and it was kind of weird to be on this shaking machine, shaking my body. But it was like, oh my gosh, I'm not mad at that person. I'm mad at myself because I didn't speak up. Because I often will freeze to please. And it was like, okay, I got clarity. And what am I going to do now to elevate my action? Oh, okay. I need to release it. It was very powerful.
that's a line right there. Freeze to please. Right? Hey, a question I have, and I like that you gave such visceral examples because I think sometimes people might hear that and be like, you have a bat and it's like, and you go and it's like you have that moment and for lack of better words, you kind of lose your shit for a second, but you allow like the feeling of it and then you do the action of it. I think if we go, I'm curious from your opinion, if we went back 10 years from now, someone might be like, you are out of control. That is out of control behavior. But what I'm hearing you say is it's like a swing. You can't go halfway through the swing and all of that power is stored up And what I'm hearing you say is like that is a recipe for like bad behavior, bad health, bad outcomes. And so if you don't complete that swing through that sound, movement, breath, you basically have you basically have stopped that power from like and retained it versus allow it to move through you.
I 100% agree. I mean, we stay stuck in fight, flight, freeze, and please. And what we want to be is we want to be in our highest functioning state to make a good decision about what we do next. We can't do that when we're in that triggered state, when we're feeling agitated. I can feel, I was, anxiety was a big, that was huge. I felt anxious and rigid and tense and afraid that is, it was just so much a part of my reality, but it was in my body. And so I couldn't create choice because I was so the elephant sitting on my chest and the cortisol racing through my system, the adrenaline. I couldn't make good choices about, okay, this how do I come back into my body, which is what you're doing in step one. Release it and then say, okay, what can I do now to elevate my action? And it is, I mean, it's really simple. It's so simple. Um, and again, I teach all my coaching clients these practices so that I'm like, okay, one of my clients has a blue baseball bat. She's like, okay, I used the blue baseball bat. I feel better. Now I can get into my, she doesn't say it this way, but into my functioning capability to actually make a good decision.
Yeah, I want to specifically of that fight, flight, um, and fawn or freeze. It can we talk specifically about the freeze? Because I think that on two ends of the spectrum, right? You go like something happens, I'm out of here, right? Or hey, I'll see your red, and I will raise you 10 and watch me like watch the locomotive. But there's that one that I call it like it's almost the silent reaction. It's a reaction, but it's silent. So how does someone recognize that the bumper cars happened? For example, I'm having a conversation with my daughter last night, and she said to me, she goes, I just get kind of scared when like I'm having, she goes with an adult, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like you totally communicate really freely with me. And she goes, yeah, but that's you because you're safe. And how does someone take this rapid power um, ra- reclaim it when they're having a freeze response, right? It's not as simple as like, I'm feeling so angry right now, or like I'm feeling triggered, but the trigger is they're feeling triggered, but it's I'm doing nothing.
Right. But I think that state is the fear. That's when we go into the freeze mode. It's like you have fear. And and so it's just another emotion. That fear is showing up somewhere in your body. I mean, you just feel it. That's what's agitating you. For me, it was anxiety, but fear is a big one for a lot of people. And so it's recognizing that you're having fearful feelings. The choice phase is really saying, okay, what's going on in my body right now? If you're afraid to speak up, there's fear underlying your system. And so you're staying quiet because you're afraid of saying something that's stupid or is going to be misinterpreted or whatever it might be. So the fear is living in your body. And the question is, do I want to release the physiological effects of the fear? So I think, I mean, even though freezing is quiet, you're still having the energetic, emotional, physiological responses in the body.
Yeah, can you give some examples of like how do you release fear or anxiety, right? Because I think at the end of the day, I don't care where you're at or who you are, you feel fear or you feel anxiety or you feel stress, like if the word anxiety doesn't resonate with you, how do you release that in the form of like sound, movement, and breath? Like, because I'm really digging this idea of like having some action come come out of this.
Yeah, it's really simple because there's no right or wrong way to use sound, movement, or breath. Like I said, my body's been known to just do weird things like jump up and down
Or somersaults.
or somersaults or cry. Sometimes I just need to recognize that I am feeling sad because I'm afraid. So whatever emotion's going on, you can still create choice by releasing it. So somebody who is afraid or is freezing, um, is their body is feeling some energetic charge that's creating these emotions. right? And, there's a whole series of things around the beliefs that we have, the thoughts we create, the actions and the results. But ultimately, it's simple. It's to say, okay, I'm feeling afraid. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling vulnerable. You don't have to even articulate that, but you just go into a quiet place and you just let your body let it out. So I have been known to sit and cry and cry and cry, like, and almost surprisingly, like, wow, I didn't expect that much sadness to come up. A lot of times underneath the sadness, there's grief that's playing out that we may not even be aware of. There's no right or wrong way. It's just saying, I'm feeling afraid. I just need to go and let my body release that, however it feels natural. And like I said, I didn't plan to do somersaults one day. I just started doing somersaults. It was my body kind of taking over, saying, okay, it could just be, pounding out of bed or like crying, sitting there holding yourself and rocking yourself could be the act of the creating choice, is acknowledging the emotion. And I want to also share a statistic, and I hope that I get this woman's name right. Um, I think, oh, she's a Harvard neuroscientist, Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, Bolte. She studied the physiological nature of emotions and was curious, once someone's feeling something, how long does it stay in the body, the system? And what she discovered is in her research is that if you're having a strong emotional reaction or strong emotion happening in your body, the research showed that that actually only stays in your body for 90 seconds. And so once we release it, it it's gone. What she also says is a lot of us forget about the 90 seconds because most of us don't know that. And then we tell ourselves stories that keep that emotion going longer. So we're perpetuating the strong, painful feelings that we're having. And so part of this is saying, okay, I'm going to feel this feeling for 90 seconds and then I'm going to let it go. And, I'm feeling this feeling of fear. I'm feeling it in my stomach. And I'm just going to sit and just let my body do whatever, or I'm going to just make noise. It could just be, whatever. It doesn't matter. That's, it's like opening up the channel to let that emotion out.
Yeah, that's amazing. 90 seconds.
Uh-huh. That's what she showed. I think it's Jill Bolt. I think Bolt's the middle name and then Taylor's the last name.
That's pretty amazing. Um, how do how do we do this rapid? I'm in a by then the day here. Rapid power reclaim process work when you have a bumper car moment that all of a sudden, like for example, like your father, like how do you metabolize that where you just go, oh shit, like that, like oh man, that's not this person, that is my dad.
Well, I mean, again, it's the first step is becoming aware that you've just been triggered rather than going into response is saying, oh, okay, you know, I'm having the same feelings I had with my dad. Now, my dad's been gone for a long time. He died many years ago. But I've still done the RPR, the rapid power reclaim process, even though he's gone. I can still sit down and do a release of my fear of him, my fear of never being enough or smart enough or whatever, even though he's been long gone. And it's just following those three steps. Okay, where am I feeling it right now? I'm feeling it in my throat. Whatever. I mean, whatever you're feeling with that emotion sitting, and then what am I going to do with sound, movement, and breath to get it out of my throat? And in this case, it just might be crying or yelling or jumping up and down or whatever. Um, the pattern. I mean, it's the same process no matter what's going on. I thought what you were going to ask me is how do you do this if you're at work? How do you do the RPR at work?
Yeah, well, let's talk about that too.
Yeah, well, there's lots of ways to do it. One way to do it is just to excuse yourself and then break, right? I was working at one company and there was a women's restroom that was sort of secret. Nobody knew about it. It was, I would go down to that restroom when I was triggered and I would throw cold water on my face to break it. I might just say, hey, I just need a break. I'll be back in a few minutes. And generally people are fine. Hey, I just need a quick pit stop. I'll be right back, whatever. You can go down there. It's a quiet place. and I cried. I do whatever I needed to get the emotion out of me. The other thing to do if you're in a meeting and someone's it triggered you right there in the moment, again, you can just you could either process it when you get home or when you're in a place where it's private, or you can excuse yourself. I don't think it's unusual for people to feel like they have to get up and leave a meeting for a few minutes, right? You wouldn't probably be doing somersaults or jumping up and down and yelling in the meeting room. I wouldn't recommend that. But it's acknowledging that there's some processing work that needs to be done before I can get back into my highest functioning adult self. Because when we're triggered, we're immediately triggered. We're either feeling the emotions we felt when we were little, rejection, abandonment, judgment, whatever it might be, and we go into our fearful response. And it's catching ourselves and saying, "I need to do this differently." And RPRs, I mean, it's such a handy, simple little tool, but it works. I use it on myself regularly. Like I said, I teach my clients and giving them strategies for how do you navigate this if this is happening at work.
That's a this is just, I feel like, really groundbreaking. I truly do, Susan. Your RPR is such, it's so simple that it like, but it had deals with all of these complexities that go along with these moments. And what I'm coming away with today is that we're not navigating corporate politics. We're not navigating like life in terms of like from, hey, how do your trajectory? What we're really navigating is our own internal past. Yep. And I think that's the incentive I'm coming away with is the faster we acknowledge and do things like RPR and like quickly go through, the faster we get to that other state of being we were talking about, that freedom. And it doesn't mean that you're no longer ever going to be triggered. Because is it fair to say, like, Susan, do you still get triggered today by the past of like your dad's memory?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of people in my business, and every time it happens, I almost think, okay, I just still have more work to do. Yeah. I think it's part of the human condition. I really do. But there's a way to shorten up the time you're in that state of unhappiness and move into the state. I love the freedom part of feeling freedom again. It's becoming responsible and recognizing your responsibility, my responsibility in those moments of, okay, this is just telling me I have more work to do on this relationship, of releasing the past and releasing the charge that's coming up with this particular person. You wouldn't believe how many angry authority figures in my, literally from the time I was 10, all the way through my career, how many angry authority figures there were that were just part of my journey of many of them I felt debilitated by and blame them and judge them. As I started to do this kind of work and started to work with wonderful coaches and mentors and advisors and did a ton of reading and research, and of course the work that Martha and I did with the book, you start to say, oh, okay. The way I'll use Celine's language because she really should get credit for it. She says, the next person that upsets you is simply an avatar for another person from your past who's triggered you. And as I started thinking about some of my most difficult relationships, I thought that is such a beautiful way of describing the other person is simply an avatar for, in my case, an angry authority figure. And in becoming like, oh, conscious, right? The conscious healing career path is where we all want to be, becoming aware, self awareness, learning how to self regulate. I think those are the two most important requirements of the future for all of us, AI or not, is capability of managing our inner selves. And it's really beautiful because I will get triggered. I'm human. Something will happen, and I do a lot of things. I do equestrian sports. I do a lot of things, and there's always somebody that comes along that upsets us. And it's just when you say, "Oh, this is so interesting, another avatar." I have some more work to do on angry authority figures, whatever it is. But then the charge gets less and less and less, and the time it takes to process the charge with the rapid power reclaim becomes shorter and shorter and shorter. And that's the gift, is you're giving yourself the gift of releasing your charge to the other person, being clear on your property and when you need to be responsible for your property rather than going into a spiral of blaming, judging, etc.
Yeah. Susan, it has been an absolute joy to have you on. I love this whole conversation. I just think that I'm so happy that we got a chance to meet, and I'm getting a chance to share. I think something that like I hear, especially growing up, had pretty much everyone who is not in the entrepreneur world is working in a corporate world. But not only that, I'm thinking about in all of my organizations and the organizations, entrepreneurs that I coach, how impactful this healing at work, because all we're doing is navigating each other's sort of.
Yeah, we are. I have a visual in one of my keynotes where I first show, we're all bringing our professional selves to the workplace. And so we're all our colleagues, but we're also bringing our past reality also. So we have all these dynamics that are playing out. And when you sit back and you start watching it like a movie, you think, oh, wow, that person just got triggered by that person. And I mean, you can see it. It happens so often at work. It happens all the time. And we become clear about, okay, wow, that person just had, like, when someone has an overreaction to something, it's always a bumper car moment. And, a lot of times I'll just ask the person, like when I was working in corporate myself, simple questions. I'm not a therapist, so I'm not recommending therapy for anybody at all, but you can become aware and asking questions like, you seem to get really upset in that moment. What were you thinking about yourself? Oh, well, I was thinking like they thought I was stupid or that I couldn't do something. I'm like, okay, that's really interesting. Have you ever felt that way before? Well, absolutely. I felt that way before. And then you'll hear a story. And then the follow-on question is simply, is it possible that your past experience could have fueled your reaction to this particular person? And sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say maybe, but it gets them thinking differently. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do is help people redirect the emotional response to other people. And so that's just another way of thinking about it. And then as a leader, again, you're not there to do therapy, but you can ask questions about, I noticed you got really upset. Um, is there something, do you need some support? Is there something I can do to help support you? It's just some typical practices to help people when they're in relationship to someone else who's had a strong bumper car reaction.
Yeah. The image I had as you were talking about your image is that we all think, going back to Peanuts, Charlie Brown, is we all think that we're one of these characters, but no one ever goes, "Oh, I'm Pigpen." And the reality of it is that I'm just having this aha right now. We all are Pigpen. And because, he comes around, he's got this kind of cloud of like dust and dirt with him. And Susan, if people want to know more about you, they want to reach out to you, they want to read more of your stuff. Where do they go to get like your socials, any more content that you're creating? Where can they go and find your book?
Yep. Well, the book's available on Amazon, and that's easy. And then my website is susanwinchester.com. So lots of information about the things I love to do with people I really enjoy working with. And then LinkedIn, Susan J. Schmitt, SCHMITT Winchester. And I post a lot on LinkedIn, things that I think are useful for people in the work world.
Yeah, well, I know that I will be following you, Susan. And if people want to go, wow, you know what? I would like to have more of this. And not just I want to read about it or do the RPR, but I will actually want to have like some like more intimate conversation with you. Is that something that you offer people?
Sure. In fact, on my website, there's a place where people can contact me, and I often get contacted by people interested in the work, either for keynotes, training. I do training related to healing at work as well. I have digital courses that are very much based on healing at work and performance leadership in the workplace. And it's an easy way to reach me. My email is easy, Susan at susanwinchester.com if someone wants to email me also. But they can certainly reach me through my website.
Well, Susan, you've been an absolute joy, and you are an absolute artisanal well of really, I think, great freedoms for so many people. Um, One of the things I like to do as you said, you listen to some of my podcasts, is let our guests kind of leave that last word, that last ripple, that last question, that last sort of quest, if you want to say, for our audience. What would you leave our audience with today?
Well, Martha and I have a couple phrases that I think are really powerful. First, if you came from a dysfunctional home, if you experienced any of those ACEs that we referenced, know that damaged is not doomed. I felt doomed. I felt like I was going to be on the roller coaster, uh, the wheel, the guinea pig wheel for so long. Damaged is not doomed, and the rest of your life is yours. You can today start interacting differently with your colleagues at work as a result of the things that we've even shared today. And so I think the concept of the rest of your life is yours is, I wish I'd learned this like 30 years. 30 years of my career, my success was fueled by my belief I wasn't good enough. I wish I could have changed that. And so I didn't know I could change it. I didn't know I had the power to create the rest of my life the way I wanted it to be. And I think healing at work in the partnership with Martha brings forward all these different ways of thinking about ourselves at work, as well as very tactical. I'm very pragmatic. What do I need to do? How do I do this? And so the rest of your life is truly yours if you want it.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being on here, Susan. And I'm hoping the audience, you take her words of wisdom and you should check out her book. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ben. It was a joy. Thank you.